Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information.
Hello and welcome back to the Australian Finance Podcast. I'm your host, Kate Campbell, and today I have the wonderful Evan Lucas on with me for our Brain Hack series. And today we're going to be talking about our favourite behaviour and investing psychology books. Welcome, Evan, to the show.
That's a very nice intro. Thank you for the intro there, Kate. I want to go back at you. The fantastic Kate Campbell, with regards to not only that, I feel kind of guilty because I'm sitting in this room looking at the amount of books that you've brought in, and I'm sitting here going, I sort of get my Kindle out these days and just sort of, so I haven't bought any props for you out there, but I'm looking forward to this because not only that.
I'll forgive you.
Oh, thank you. I think we're going to put some books out there that you and I love and also inverted commas, not hate, but sort of question. Is that the term? Or maybe
there's a lot of finance books I question, Evan.
I mean, we were talking off air and let's sort of talk about this. Some of the really most popular finance books at the moment, I actually think go against what you and I have been talking about with this Brain Hack series. There's a lot of them also that have, I would actually argue, have got inverted commas lucky with regards to their popularity. And again, it's what we talked about in the couple episodes back with regards to confirmation bias and attention bias and all those kinds of things. Buy this one because everybody's buying it. And then you actually read it and it's utter rubbish. Let's also not beat around the bush. I'm not going to name names, but you and I were talking about a very famous one out of the States at the moment that's getting a lot of attention for all the wrong reasons. I think that's why this episode's really important, because we also talk about this, your favorite term, analysis paralysis. It's also about information overload and how you sift through good and bad information and what actually may come out as being a person that you really respect that actually might not give you what you want. So let's dive right in. Go on. You go with your book first because you've got the props. I don't.
Yes. Well, I thought I had to mention it, even though I read it a few years ago now, but The Psychology of Money. Can we see that in the screen, Monique? Monique's giving me the nod.
How many times have you talked about this book? I mean, I get it. I love it, right? And then Morgan Housel's stuff is incredible. I'm going to talk about that a bit more. But how many times have you read it and how many times have you had to mention it?
Read it once, listened to it via audiobook once. But I think it's a really good book. It's an easy one to give to a friend to start with on your journey. It's a good one to read in conjunction with The Barefoot Investor or whatever Australian money book you want to read. It just lays basic foundations, tells stories, and for most people that I've spoken to that I've given a copy, they found it engaging and it kept them going.
I think that's the word, engaging. As I said to you, I love it because obviously it's my world and what it is. I do, and I want to be, critique this today. I want to actually go through ours and actually critique them. There were stories in there that I actually found were clearly down in sort of Morgan's path. And what I mean by that, he has a clear, very strong view about how you deal with certain things in certain ways. He's very open, and I think that's fantastic, about the fact that he doesn't like things like debt, that he, lives a fairly frugal lifestyle, despite the fact the man's, a multimillionaire, which is great. But I also feel a lot of these books, he talks about Barefoot Investor as well, sort of suggest to you that this is the way. I've always been of the opinion there is no one way. Everybody is different.
And that's why we're mentioning more than one book today, Evan.
Correct. And that's exactly my point, was that his book is brilliant. Don't get caught up in the stories with regards to this story's better than that one, or this is the right way, or this is not, because I think that's his whole book. I just thought that maybe the one little point that he slightly missed was to say, please understand that this isn't the necessarily correct thing. I mean, the story about Bill Gates and how he started is fantastic. Again, the story around, some of the richest people in the States that nobody ever knew about is a fantastic story. But again, it's all about balance. And I think that's what he's trying to say that maybe slightly missed in that book, was that, if you are making a lot of money, being rich and wealthy is one of his key terms, and I absolutely back him on what he says here. Being wealthy, I think, is a fabulous thing because you can have and can continue to do what you need to do at all times rather than being rich, which is having money and then just sort of not having any respect for it. But there's also a point that you love to make in things like your book, which is buying happiness, which is having wealth also does mean that you enjoy the wealth that you have. Sometimes I thought that was slightly lost in that story.
And that's something to keep in mind when you read a lot of these books that we're going to mention. They are written by people who are quote unquote well educated in the US or the UK. They're doing well financially. They've got a professional network. they've got emergency fund, they've got all that security sorted, and it's usually been done far in the past. So they're seeing the world of finance and behavior and making choices very differently.
Yeah, and what we just said, don't forget they have their own biases.
Yeah.
And no matter how well educated, how good they are at their jobs, and no matter what they do, their biases will come through. And you can hear when we talk, our biases come through. Right? I'm always trying to think about it, but instinctively my bias will go bang, and then I'll have to backtrack off it. And so it's the same. I mean, the one to highlight very clearly with your point there, we talk about this book a lot, but James Clear with Atomic Habits, he had the network, right? So he had it. He had 250,000 people were already signed up to the jamesclear.com page before he launched Atomic Habits. So again, always make that question, why is this book so popular? It could be because, the network was already there, and therefore he was just basically selling back into it. Now, again, do want to point this out, Atomic Habits, excellent book.
I'd also add in an Australian author, Dr. Gina Cleo, who actually has studied at university level and done lots of research on habit formation and development. So her book is very research focused, but very practical as well. And we did an episode with her earlier in the year as part of our summer series. So she has a book, The Habit Revolution, which I'd highly recommend as well.
Can I go next?
Yes.
It's not really technically a finance book, although it's moved into finance, which is Nudge. So Nudge, Improving Your Decisions About Health, Wellness and Happiness, which is by the world-renowned economist Richard Thaler. It does have issues, and I do want to point that out, but I love it. Like, the reason I love it is that it develops into a whole range of things about sort of not just sort of taking Greek philosophy and Stoicism, but about the idea of choice. It's one of my big sort of topics I love to talk about. Having choice is a fantastic freedom, but having too much choice is actually something we don't like. And that whole concept was actually probably developed by Theidler and his person with Sunstein, who wrote this. So Cassius Sunstein was the other person that wrote the book Nudge. That whole concept that I've spoken about before came from these guys. And it is around the idea that choice actually gets in the way of our biases. It gets in the way of our ability to actually flow, is their term, through life in a fairly sort of sustained way. Their core start line is human beings, like electricity, take the path of least resistance. And that's fair. And that sort of makes sense. Again, if you go back to sort of just dialing it back and why I love this book, because it is more about not just the psychology, but also the physiology, that, we are still technically animals, and we have an animal mentality based inside us, in the fact that the path of least resistance means that we're conserving energy, means that we're conserving our requirements for that. If we do need a burst of energy, fight or flight, or if we do need to do things that are outside the norm, there's an energy store waiting to go. So I know it's not finance, but I think it's a
huge amount of things outside of finance help us with finance.
Yeah, and that's why I love this, because it talks about the reason it's called Nudge is about basically the power of actually using real world events to nudge you to do things. And that's always what, clearly the term nudge is what we know. It's now one of the most used terms in corporate speak, unfortunately.
A lot of these books do wind their way into the corporate world.
Yeah, but if you haven't read it, go and read it. It's fantastic. I love it.
Did you also enjoy The Paradox of Choice by Barry Schwartz, I believe? I
haven't read that. I have seen a synopsis on it, but I haven't read it. And I know exactly what it's about and how it works. Fantastic concepts. Again, builds on this. And that's why I wanted to go through Nudge, because Nudge is probably the sort of, Godfather, is that the term? I don't know. The original, to some extent, concept on this whole idea around actually that choice is limiting, in their words, rather than actually choice is expanding.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. My next pick is a book called Essentialism by Greg McKeown. Okay, we got that in the screen there. This Essentialism, the discipline and the pursuit of less. Yes. I know why you love this concept. It's all about simplifying things and how we often get very cluttered with options and choices and all the different things we could do. And this book really forces you to think about, well, what is most important right now? And it pushes you to think about priorities and what questions you're asking and what you're focusing on, because we have lots of different financial goals and we have options when it comes to ETFs, and we could do so many different things with our money. But if we try and do everything, we probably won't make much progress on anything. So this book encouraged me to focus on, well, what is most important right now? What is a few questions I can ask myself with my finances? One of them is, can I explain this to a friend before I am allowed to jump into any investment? So that's one of my essential questions that I ask myself. I listen to this via audiobook. Like with Spotify, you can listen to 15 hours for free a month if you're a premium member. So that's how I listen to this one. And I would really recommend this one. Again, not finance, but plays a really important role in your finances.
Yeah, because again, having talked about this again before we came on to do the show, it does feed into it. Again, it's about restraint, right? It's about understanding what's important to you. It's about also decluttering your life. It particularly is clearly targeted at those that accumulate things. And it's not necessarily accumulating of money, but it's accumulated of objects. And, it's almost like, the architectural version of minimalism and that kind of concept of understanding that you can actually get enjoyment out of what you have and enjoying finer things when they come to you rather than just constantly acquiring. And then the crossover that comes with clutter. Right, the inability to actually think forward, to the inability to actually see past now, because you're constantly not just cluttering yourself, but needing more at all points in the cycle. And so I haven't actually read. I think I will have a read of that, but that concept's quite a common one at the moment, which is great. Again, we talked about this a couple episodes about the rise of social media. Those kinds of books are there designed to counter them, because social media is a whole concept that those that are on social media are using it. And again, I understand the irony that you and I are sitting here on social media of promoting a product that you must have now. FOMO, it is all around that simple sales tool that you feel like you are missing out. It feels like it's on discount. It feels like you need it. These concepts go against that. And I think it's beautiful because you realistically don't need it, and enjoy what you have. Now, I'm going to do my second book, which also, actually, it's going to be two books amalgamated.
Oh, yeah.
The reason I say that, the first one is, we've already talked about Morgan Housel, but I want to talk about the other one that he's just released, The Same as Ever. I read it. I enjoyed it. But, and I'll come back to that, and I know you've got a but as well. The other book that I talked about this before, my biases show through, and I'm very aware of it, which is probably why I like this book, which is The Discipline of Destiny by Ryan Holiday. It's very famous. Everybody knows about it. It's based on Greek philosophy. The modern Stoic, etc. But again, I think the reason I like it, and I want to be really honest here, is because I identify with that. I really like restraint. I love having discipline. I love, that's why I love exercise. It's why I love going to the gym. The promotion that provides me for the ability to actually, inverted commas, rationally stop myself from making, decisions I don't want to make. That's why I probably love it. And I love the fact that it's all around discipline.
You never thought about joining the army?
No, God, no. But it's not about that in my view, because it's all about discipline. And I think, for me personally, and that's why I like this book, it's not going to be for everyone. In fact, in a modern day, I actually think reading it from a modern day lens, I'm surprised it's so popular. Like, I really am. But again, then I think about, hang on a minute, someone like me likes it. And I know there's a lot
Stoic philosophy's had a huge boom in the last 5 years.
Yeah, it's a massive renaissance. And again, it's probably people like Ryan who have an incredible platform. It's what we talked about at the start of this as well. He has an immense platform out of the States, and it is now global. So whether you agree with his concepts are a different story. Because again, if you look at it from the modern day lens, there are stuff he says in there that would actually quite almost offend some people, I think is the term, because he is very strong on it, right? Stoicism is, it's quite a strong thought process. So the reason I wanted to raise those two books is because they are incredibly popular. They are well written. They have very interesting concepts, but they're also grating, and they're probably also quite striking to a lot of people. Can I get you to have a look at your view on, Same as Ever? Because I think what your view on it is fascinating, because I'm somewhat agreeing with you.
I thought it was very interesting choice of follow-up for Morgan as a book. I read it. I read it in January this year. The year's gone by so quickly, Evan. I cannot keep up.
The quarter's over, my friend.
Gosh.
9 months to go.
But I did think it was very cherry-picked stories where you could have easily flipped the idea. there wasn't much research behind storytelling, which is what he's known for.
So it was really anecdotal, yeah?
Anecdotal, and some of the points weren't very strong or backed up by much. And I just found that to reinforce his point that some things are the same as ever, he just repeated the point every single chapter, which I know was the point of the book, but it kind of missed the mark for me. And I don't think a friend would find it as engaging if they weren't a finance reader.
Yeah, and I don't even think it was that. I actually think he's really driven home the chapter around the billionaires, right? So his point around someone like Elon Musk, or, you look at his whole concept about those people of chasing that idea you don't want to do. So again, Steve Jobs is another one he uses as an example. Bill Gates uses as the example in the fact that the way that their mind works, they can't turn it off, right? Again, Mark Zuckerberg is another one that he uses in there. So they're stories that are very obvious from the point of view that he's sitting there going, you could give those guys the money that they have now, it still wouldn't stop them doing what they're doing because it's not about that. And that's what he's talking about with the same of ever, is that those kinds of people have always existed, that the people that you're around, and again, all of that's there. The decision-making people make has been the same as it always been. I agree with you. I think I felt when I was reading, I'm going, what I feel this is literally you can just pick the thing up, open it up to some random chapter, read it and put it back down again. I think that's what he wanted to go for.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you only read one story in that book, you could get the concept, which is why I'm with you. When I was reading, I'm going, you just said that, and you just said that, and you literally.
And most of the characters were from Twitter, just big names on Twitter. And I did notice there were very few females mentioned in the book. It was a very guy book.
Yeah, and I think that's a problem. I mean, because again, the rise of female participation in finance is fantastic. It's not slowing down. I actually think in the next 10 years, there's every chance it's not going to just be 50-50, that women could actually overtake men, which is fantastic.
And there are lots of stories there and people you could feature and anecdotes you could include. You just have to sometimes look a little bit harder.
Yeah, correct. So quickly going back to the other one with regards to looking at Discipline of Destiny. As I said to you, I think the reason for me it's so interesting and why I love it from a finance perspective is that I've always found that if I can slow my mind down and actually concentrate on what makes me happy. I've talked about this before, where when I go for a run or when I do gym is when I can actually genuinely concentrate on the things that I enjoy, because my body is doing something else, my mind is somewhere. And that is normally concentrating on the family, that we are wealthy in my view, that we have the ability to do what we want when we want. And that is also part of the concept of stoicism and discipline, in the fact that I have the discipline to go, I need to do this every single day. It keeps my whole concept in a logical manner, etc. There's also, it filters into something else that's becoming quite a big trend outside of finance, but in health, which is, using ice bath. And the reason ice baths are becoming so important.
Are you one of those?
Haven't fully started or embraced it yet, but I'm getting
Wim Hof.
The Wim Hof. And again, the whole idea of Wim Hof is, again, if you look at ice baths in terms of sport, it's to reduce inflammation, right? So it's to slow down the inflammation so that sports stars can get up the next week and be as, absolutely 100% ready to go. Wim Hof is the other side. So that's obviously to reduce, inflammation. Wim Hof is about reducing fight or flight and actually moving to rest and digest. So for those of you who don't know what that means, is basically it forces your body to slow down and to just basically almost desensitize itself to everything else but what's going on inside the cold effect that happens with freezing your body at, 12 or under degrees water. And it does slow you down. It's very good for anxiety. It's very good for stress. And that's why it's becoming so popular. Again, it's something that Holiday talks about a lot with the stoicism discipline. And it's about disciplining your body that when you can't get into an ice bath, inverted commas, that you can actually then manage to bring yourself away from fight or flight and that adrenaline stimulation, the stress that's being generated, into rest and digest, which is to slow down, take the adrenaline away, take that physiological stimulation away, and actually slow down and be able to deal with the stress in a much more rational manner. So finance is why this is interesting, because again, the concept is starting to move into that space. Stressful finances, cost of living is now up. that stress is actually putting a lot of people into fight or flight quite regularly. Can you actually manage to basically turn your physiology off and stop, your adrenal glands on your kidneys stimulating it, the amount of adrenaline stressing you out and going the opposite way? So that's why I like it. Again, as I said, very open to the idea that this is my bias coming out very strongly. So by all means, I would be happy for you to turn around and tell me that I'm absolutely full of it. But that's why I enjoy it. And as you can see, I can talk about it till the cows come home.
All right. Well, on the topic of books, my third choice is How to Decide by Annie Duke. So this is a book I have recommended before on the podcast. It's more of a workbook, if anything. And
it looks like it. You've put a lot of work on that.
Yeah. Well, she was a former poker player and she has done a lot of study and research on making better decisions. And having done a lot of that herself, she provides a lot of really interesting exercises. She's done the research on how to improve your decision-making process. And the big thing I took away from this book is the idea of resulting, where we base the quality of our decisions on the outcome and we don't often think about the process. So if our investment does really well, we think, oh, made a great decision. Whereas we could have just got very lucky and we had not a good decision-making process, and that can take us down the wrong track over time. Whereas if we think about, okay, regardless of whether the decision leads to a good or a bad result, I want to think about the process that led to that decision and how I can improve that. And one of the big things she suggests is writing down your decision-making process so that over time, when you get the outcome, you can refer back to that process and see, is there anything I could change or improve about my decision-making process? And the other thing she also suggests is having a failure log. So if you do fail at something, you can write it down and write some of the reasons that led to that and just keep track of things so you can learn and improve for them and see failure as a learning tool.
I agree with that. I think that's the one thing that we don't embrace. I mean, it's always been talked about, even in movies, they love to say, learn from failure, all those kind of movies. Again, it feeds into the whole concept that I've just talked about as well, which is discipline, understanding yourself, understanding your biases. I haven't read that, and I must admit that looks like a fascinating. I'd love somebody like that, because those kinds of people, those who've actually sort of become gamblers that actually can almost inverted commas game it, they think in ways that you and I would never think about. So that's a fascinating sort of book to have a look at. Apologies, I've got not much to add to that.
Well, I highly recommend that one. Decision-making will help you in all areas of your life, especially in your finances, when we find it so hard often to move from information to decision-making.
I think that's all we've got time for today. That's a very, very in-depth episode in a very short period of time. That was really good.
I have received plenty of community book suggestions as well, so I've included them all in the show notes. So if you want to link to any of the books we mentioned in this episode or some bonus suggestions, head over there. If you want more brain hacks from Evan and I and you have some suggestions, let us know. There is a link in your podcast description that says ask a question. Just send it there and we'll find it. You can find previous episodes of Brain Hacks in the show notes. And if you want to share this episode with a friend, Evan and I would be very grateful. Evan, thanks for joining me.
Thank you as always for having me, Kate. I really enjoy it. And as I said, I also reiterate that please send in your information. Please send in your feedback. We love it, positively or negatively, because it makes us better and hopefully make the episodes going forward better.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.